Do you ever feel that profound level of despair and isolating loneliness as you try and navigate and endure midlife as a man? If so, I can relate. And I'm here to tell you that you are not alone in this. It's a subject we don't talk enough about, but it is crucial to address and to understand. And it is my intention with this video to share a different perspective of loneliness that you might not have heard of. And it's not going to be the same old looking at it through the lens of a lack of social connections or relationships with other people, as much as it is going to be a intrapersonal journey of really coming to know and belong to yourself. My hope is that I can shed some light and address and uncover some of the root causes of male midlife loneliness, and also some strategies and solutions that you might not have heard of. Ultimately, I'd like to share with you my journey through loneliness and how I was able to use it to transform my life for the better. You know, Norman Cousins said the eternal quest of the human being is to shatter his loneliness. Even though loneliness feels like it's going to last forever, and maybe it really has for you. Maybe you've been going through loneliness for most of your life like I had been. But when we can learn just a few quick, easy, simple steps to actually finally face our loneliness instead of try and exhaust all of our resources in avoiding it or disowning it, it turns into just a season of life and begins to dissipate, leaving behind it gifts of wisdom and personal transformation. I would argue that loneliness is part of a hero's journey for us as a man. It's the desert, the abyss in the hero's journey that's filled with trials and tribulations and despair and loneliness. And it's a treacherous terrain that we must traverse if we accept the call to do so. But for so many of us, me included, I spent all of my time trying to numb the loneliness out. And to be honest, I wasn't ever sure if I was feeling lonely or if I was feeling sad or if I was feeling unfelt grief or if I was just fucking depressed. It all felt the same for me until I decided to consciously choose to accept that I felt lonely. To the first three techniques, I guess I could say, that I would like to share with you today. And the first of which is just to acknowledge that you do feel lonely. Just acknowledge it in this moment and allow yourself to feel it. The second step is just to simply accept that it is there. Much of the suffering that exists from loneliness is our resistance to loneliness itself. So what does the resistance actually look like? Well, for me, it looked a lot like shooting heroin in my arm. It looked like consuming a great deal of pornography. It looked like getting into another codependent, trauma-bonded, toxic fucking relationship. Because I felt so much despair in this realm of loneliness that I could not bear to feel it anymore. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the know-how. I didn't have the understanding, nor did I have the resources to navigate it. The third step that I would like to share with you for me was the most profound and powerful step in this process, which is to compassionately tell yourself that it is okay for you to feel lonely. Not only that you are okay to feel lonely, but that you are allowed to. If we have resistance to feeling it, it triggers deeper suffering. So therefore, the solution has to be just to allow ourselves to be with it. Now, to take this a step further, I'd like to ask you a question. And grab a notebook and a pen or something to write with, because if you truly want to be free from the suffering of your loneliness, you're going to need to take notes and you're going to need to take some very small action steps to get there. And the first thing I'd like to invite you to do is to write down what thoughts you have that trigger the feeling of loneliness. And I'll share with you a couple of the thoughts that I used to have that ran rampant in my inner critic part of my mind. A lot like, well, mom and dad fucking abandoned me, so who would want to even be with me anyways? Or people really don't care about me or even notice me. Or look at my life right now. What do I even have to fucking offer anyone? And so again, I invite you to write down these thoughts. This, first of all, allows you to take ownership and accountability for your loneliness. And just allow yourself in this moment to freaking be with it for the first time. If this is your first time ever really truly desiring to sit in it and understand it, because later in the video, we're going to get into a dialogue with your loneliness that should set you on the path to freedom. So if it's all right with you, I'd like to share a little bit about my story and my journey with loneliness. First and foremost, I'll say that I honestly had a very lonely childhood. It's not that people weren't there around me, but I grew up in a very volatile environment and found myself alone quite often. Alone and scared, and nobody showing up to comfort, nurture, or support me. I wouldn't realize the impact that my childhood experiences with loneliness would have on me until years later. Towards the tail end of middle school, I found myself feeling extremely lonely, even more lonely than I did in my early childhood years, simply because I didn't have a mom and I didn't have a dad. Now, I had a huge friend group and spent the night at friends' houses for a good majority of my middle school and high school years, yet this nagging feeling of loneliness followed me everywhere I went, regardless of the interpersonal connections that I had with people. In all reality, I felt fucking lost. I didn't know who I was. I didn't have grown-ups around me enough in childhood to reflect back to me who I actually was. And so I felt very alone in the world. And when I say I wouldn't actually realize the impact that this loneliness in childhood would have on me until many years later, I mean, I'm 42 as of just a couple days ago, and it wasn't until just over 4 years ago that I was shown the depth of my loneliness. Now, this wasn't an experience that I necessarily chose to have, but it was one that I guess the universe or God, the creator, decided I needed to experience. Now, I thought I had known loneliness before, but this was a whole new level of loneliness I never knew that could exist. I mean that just over 4 years ago, I was brought to my knees in despair. Just over 4 years ago, I found myself committing suicide. I was a homeless heroin junkie living on the streets, and it ate me alive. So that day, that cold winter, just over 4 years ago, I made a decision to inject enough heroin into my body that should have killed 3 people. I had overdosed many times before I knew what to do. And so I did. I woke up the following morning turning different colors, nearly frozen to death because it was the middle of winter. And I came face to face with what was causing my loneliness. I don't know how to explain it in any other words than Polaroid pictures started to flash before my mind. Polaroid pictures of all the trauma, of my father's suicide, of my mother's abusive alcoholic life, of being curled up in a ball alone in the corner of a dark room because people were constantly fucking fighting. And I felt scared and alone. All of it came rushing through. The heroin was a vice, an addiction, something I used to escape the pain that I didn't know and that I didn't understand. All I knew was that it was too fucking painful to feel. And that left me feeling extremely lonely time and time again. It didn't matter if I was in a beautiful, non-toxic relationship. Eventually, I would sabotage it with loneliness. And I'll get more into my story of addiction in a future video and more into how men experience trauma in their life in another video as well. But for now, I want to bring the focus back to loneliness and the purpose it can actually serve us in our life. After I woke up from that intentional overdose and suicide attempt, I made a decision to face all of my pain head on. I entered a program of addiction recovery. I found a spiritual connection. I got myself into new environments that were supportive of this type of a journey. I had to let go of friendships that no longer served me. I had to let go of relationships that no longer served me. And I had to enter an arena of solitude, in order to truly know and understand my pain. I would argue that loneliness is a signal to us that we don't quite understand our pain or know our pain, but furthermore, it's a signal to us that we need to reintegrate parts of ourself that have been lost. My loneliness is intelligent. My loneliness carries with it wisdom. The loneliness I feel from time to time serves a purpose in my life today, if I can just learn to be present with it. 2 years ago, I made a intentional and conscious decision to go into a 16-month-long solitude. Now, I didn't commit to 16 months, but that's what it ended up being for me. Now, I had a job, a career, I was going to work every day, but as far as friendships and social connections were concerned, they did not exist. I had been working on my own spiritual development, and some may call this a dark night of the soul experience. Whatever label you want to put on it, I chose to be alone. In fact, I don't know if I actually chose it, to be honest, because there were times I tried to pull myself out of it and get on Tinder and get on another dating app or find another toxic relationship. All of the things that I used to try and mitigate the feeling of loneliness with were present, but loneliness kept pulling me back in. There was more to be learned. 16 months is a long time, and I don't recommend it to anyone. However, that was what my journey was like with loneliness and despair. Now, during that time, I had hired a men's coach. I had become a professional men's coach myself. I studied consciousness. I studied human potential. I practiced meditation twice daily, transcendental meditation to be exact, which I would recommend to anyone and everyone. So I had a good foundation to endure this 16-month period of loneliness. I spent countless hours at home on the couch and on my bed with a journal and a pen and books. I read books like the Bhagavad Gita, books like The Surrender Experiment, The Kabbalion, Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life by Dr. Wayne Dyer. So many different books, and I filled probably at least 200 journals during that time. To be honest, I was just on this obsessive quest to understand my loneliness. I was so sick and tired of constantly feeling it, and becoming intimate with it was one thing that I had never done. The longer I chose to let go of the vices that I used to use to mitigate the pain and suffering of loneliness, the more I uncovered about myself. I had to become an investigator of my loneliness. And that brings me to some of the last strategies that I would like to share with you all today. The first strategy is to do a visualization and have an inner dialogue with your loneliness. Close your eyes and visualize a scenario where you are facing your loneliness, and just allow yourself to feel those emotions fully. Then initiate an inner dialogue with your loneliness, asking questions like, what message or lesson do you hold for me? What unmet needs or unresolved emotions are you trying to convey? How have past experiences or beliefs contributed to this feeling of loneliness that I'm feeling? By engaging in this internal dialogue, you'll start to uncover deeper insights into the roots of your loneliness and gain a better understanding of its origins. The second, and what I felt to be a super powerful method of managing and dealing with the loneliness, is inner child work. You can connect with your inner child through visualization or meditation, and just imagine meeting your younger self and observe his feelings and experiences. Explore questions such as, what were the experiences or events from my childhood that might have contributed to these feelings of loneliness? How did I cope with loneliness as a child? And are there any unhealed wounds or unmet needs from my childhood that are still affecting me today? By revisiting and nurturing your inner child, you can unearth unresolved emotions and past traumas that might be influencing your present feelings of loneliness, ultimately allowing you to address and heal these underlying issues. Consistent practice of these shadow work techniques can help you uncover the roots of loneliness, bringing awareness to hidden emotions and past experiences, thereby facilitating a process of healing and self-understanding. I would like for you guys to remember that loneliness is not a death sentence. It's merely just a season of life. And if you found any of this information in this video helpful, leave me a comment below and please subscribe. Thank you for listening and watching.